His hands were rough as they roamed over my body, fingers digging into my hips, pressing me against the cold glass of his penthouse window. Below us, the city sprawled endlessly, its lights flickering like dying stars. But up here, in this private world he created, I was the only thing that mattered. I gasped when his mouth found my throat, his teeth scraping against my skin before he kissed the spot he'd just bitten. A thrill shot through me, my body arching instinctively into him. "Say it," he growled against my skin, his breath hot, his voice thick with something dark. My fingers dug into his shoulders, nails raking down his muscled back. "Say what?" His grip on me tightened. "That you're mine." I shuddered. Something flickered in his dark eyes before his mouth crashed against mine again, swallowing any hesitation, any doubt. His tongue was relentless, coaxing, teasing, demanding, and I met him with equal fervor. I was lost in him, in the way he lifted me effortlessly, carrying me across the room, laying me down onto the cool sheets of his bed. He hovered over me, his gaze burning into mine as his fingers trailed down my stomach, slow, deliberate. "You're so beautiful," he murmured. I barely had time to process his words before his hands resumed their exploration, his touch igniting something primal inside me. He made me forget everything, who I was, where I was. The only thing that existed in that moment was him. The way he moved, the way he made me feel like I was unraveling beneath him. "More," I breathed, desperate, aching. A slow, wicked smile spread across his lips. "Patience, love." But I had none. Not with him. Not when his hands knew exactly how to make me tremble, when his mouth left a burning trail across my skin. He gave me exactly what I needed. And then there was nothing else. Only heat, only pleasure, only him. Minutes stretched into eternity. My body was spent, my skin damp, my pulse still racing when he finally collapsed beside me, pulling me against his chest. His fingers tangled in my hair, his lips brushing the shell of my ear. "You don't know what you've done to me, Elise," he murmured. "You have no idea." I smiled against his skin, tracing lazy circles on his chest. "Maybe I do." He chuckled low and dark, but there was something else there. Something almost haunted. I should have noticed it then. I should have realized that beneath the passion, beneath the hunger, there was something deeper, something broken. But I didn't. I was too caught up in him, in us, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. I woke up to the feeling of Nathan's fingers tracing slow patterns on my bare back. His touch was gentle now, the opposite of the hunger he had shown me just hours before. The room was still dim, only the faint glow of the city lights slipping through the sheer curtains. My body ached in the most delicious way, a reminder of the way he had claimed me over and over again last night. "Morning," I murmured sleepily, my voice husky. "Morning," he replied, his lips brushing against my shoulder. His tone was soft, but there was something distant about it. I turned onto my side to face him. His dark eyes studied me, his expression unreadable. It was moments like this, when the fire between us settled into something quieter, that I felt the weight of his mystery. Nathan had always been an enigma, and even now, with his body still tangled with mine, I felt like there was a part of him I would never reach. "What?" I whispered, reaching up to trace his jawline. He caught my wrist, bringing my fingers to his lips. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking at you." I smiled, but a flicker of unease crept into my chest, because for the first time, I felt like Nathan was looking at me as if I were something fragile, as if he knew something I didn't. I didn't get the chance to ask him about it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I should call her. His expression darkened just for a second. "Now." I hesitated. "It'll just take a minute." Nathan let out a quiet sigh but nodded. I slid out of bed, my lips still swollen from his kisses, my body marked by his touch. I looked different, as if I were already becoming someone else in his arms. I shook off the thought and called Olivia. "You're scaring me. What's wrong?" She hesitated. "It's about Nathan." My stomach twisted. "What about him?" "You need to be careful with him, Elise. There's something you don't know." Then reached for my waist, pulling me back toward the bed. "Come here," he murmured. I let him guide me, let him pull me into his arms again. Let myself get lost in the way his hands moved over me. The way Nathan had been acting had made me uneasy. I needed to know more about him. Needed to understand why there were moments when he looked at me, as if I were both the thing he wanted most, and the thing he couldn't bear to have. I had expected it to be difficult. But Nathan didn't hide his movements. He didn't try to shake me off, which made it even more disturbing when I saw where he was going. A house. Old but well kept. Stepping inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and something familiar, something I couldn't quite place. The house was quiet. Too quiet. And then I saw them. The photographs. Lining the walls. The walls felt like they were closing in. A horrible realization was clawing its way to the surface, but I wouldn't believe it. No, I choked out. No, this doesn't make sense. My father, Nathan took a step closer. You already know, don't you? His voice was low, almost gentle. I shook my head frantically. No. No, I don't. His gaze never wavered. Your father, he said softly, is also mine. The world shattered. I stumbled back, shaking. That's not true. That's not. Nathan exhaled slowly. It is. I pressed a hand against my stomach, nausea rising. You knew, I whispered. His silence was my answer. My stomach twisted violently. I felt like I was going to be sick. And then I realized something even worse. Something far, far worse. Nathan had known. And he had pursued me anyway. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the room blurred. The photographs around me melting into indistinct shapes. My mother. My father. Nathan. My mind couldn't process it fast enough. Couldn't reconcile the man I loved with the horrific truth staring me in the face. You knew. I whispered again, my voice shaking. You knew this whole time. Didn't you? Nathan didn't move. His face was unreadable. Dark eyes watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Elise. Don't say my name. My voice cracked and I stumbled back. Bitter laugh. Oh? And how exactly did you plan to tell me? Before or after you fucked me again? Something flickered in his gaze. A flash of emotion so brief I couldn't catch it. Elise, he said. And something else, something even worse. Because despite everything, despite the truth I now knew, my body still ached for him. My skin still burned from his touch. I wrapped my arms around myself, as if that could somehow erase what we had done. Why? My voice was barely above a whisper. Why would you do this? Nathan exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. Because your mother ruined my mother's life. The word struck me like a slap. I shook my head, still unable to comprehend what he was saying. What are you talking about? Nathan turned away, running a hand through his hair. His movements were controlled, but I could sense the rage simmering just beneath his surface. My mother loved your father, he said. She gave everything to him. And then he left her. For your mother. The blood in my veins turned to ice. That's not true, I said automatically, but my voice wavered. Nathan's gaze snapped back to mine. Isn't it? Tell me, Elise, did your mother ever talk about my mother? Did she ever tell you that before she married your father, he had another woman? That he had a son? I opened my mouth but nothing came out. Because no, my mother had never mentioned anything like that. Nathan took another step toward me. She knew about us. She knew my mother was pregnant, and she still took him away. She married him. Built a perfect little family with him, while my mother was left to raise me alone. And then, when he finally acknowledged me, I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But deep down, a part of me knew he wasn't lying. My mother had always been careful about the way she spoke of my father's past. She had painted their love story as something fated, something unbreakable. But she had also been fiercely protective of their life together. Almost too protective. Had she known about Nathan? About his mother? Had she made sure he was never truly part of my father's life? My stomach twisted violently. It still didn't explain why. Why Nathan had done this to me. You wanted revenge. I whispered, my voice barely audible. Nathan's expression didn't change. You wanted me to fall for you. I continued, my throat tightening. You wanted me to love you. And then you wanted to ruin me. Didn't you? Silence. And that was all the confirmation I needed. A broken, bitter laugh escaped my lips. And I was so fucking stupid, wasn't I? Nathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. I wiped at my face furiously. And now what? You got what you wanted, didn't you? You got me to love you. You got me into your bed. And now what? I felt sick. I turned toward the door, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run, to get as far away from him as possible. But then Nathan spoke again. What about the baby? I froze. The silence between us was deafening. Slowly, I turned back around to face him. His expression was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his body. The way his fists remained clenched at his sides. I swallowed hard. What about it? His eyes burned into mine. Is it mine? The world stood still. I had known this moment would come. Because even I didn't know the truth. Nathan took a step closer, his voice lower now. Tell me the truth, Elise. My throat was dry. I don't know. His entire body went rigid. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to hold his gaze. It could be yours. But it could be. He exhaled sharply, cutting me off. His hands raked through his hair, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something raw in his eyes, something dangerously close to fear. My chest ached. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted to scream at him for what he had done to me, for the way he had manipulated me, for the way he had let me love him knowing it was all a lie. But most of all, I wanted him to tell me it hadn't been a lie at all. I hated myself for that, for the part of me that still wanted him. The way something close to fear flickered in his eyes, before he masked it with anger. Nathan was always controlled, always composed. But tonight, I had seen something raw, and that terrified me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands, my mind replaying every moment we had shared. Every touch, every whispered promise. I had given myself to him completely, believing that he was the one person who understood me, the one person who truly saw me. But it had all been a lie. He had known. From the very beginning he had known. The betrayal should have been enough to erase every trace of desire I had for him. It should have been enough to make me hate him. But it wasn't. My body still craved him. My heart still ached for him. And that was the most unforgivable thing of all. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling shakily. I needed to get out of here. Grabbing my coat, I walked outside. The cold night air hitting my skin like a slap. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. But as soon as I reached the end of the street, I saw him. Nathan was leaning against his car, arms crossed, eyes locked onto me the second I stepped outside. I froze. He didn't move. He didn't say a word. He just watched me. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. What else was I supposed to say, Nathan? Thanks for ruining my life? His jaw tightened. Elise. No. I took a step back, shaking my head. Making me believe you loved me when all you wanted was revenge. He didn't respond. And that silence, that confirmation, cut deeper than any words ever could. I swallowed hard, wrapping my arms around myself. You wanted to destroy me, I whispered. And you almost did. Nathan's expression darkened. That was never the plan. Wasn't it? My voice cracked. Because it sure as hell feels like it. Something flashed in his eyes. Something I couldn't decipher. I didn't expect to fall for you, he said, his voice low, almost broken. That wasn't supposed to happen. I let out a breathless, humorless laugh. Oh well, that makes me feel so much better, Nathan. Really? His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Elise, you have to believe me. Why should I? I cut him off. Why the hell should I believe anything you say? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then finally he exhaled. You shouldn't. His voice barely above a whisper. I'm still the man who held you at night, who kissed every inch of your skin, who made you moan my name. A sharp breath caught in my throat. Stop, I whispered. My body betraying me as heat coiled in my stomach. I hated him. I hated myself for wanting him. You don't own me, I said, my voice shaking. Nathan's fingers brushed against my wrist, featherlight. Don't I? I turned around sharply, shoving him away. You're a fucking monster. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised. Maybe, he said quietly. But that doesn't change what's between us. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. There's nothing between us. Nathan tilted his head slightly, watching me the way a predator watches prey. And that was the worst part of all. Just go, Nathan, I whispered. Please. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Pain. But he didn't argue. He stepped back, his expression unreadable once more. Fine, he said. I'll go. Relief flooded through me. But it was short-lived. Nathan turned to leave, but before he did, he looked at me one last time. But this isn't over, Elise. His voice was dark, filled with something I couldn't quite name. Not even close. And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been, my heart pounding. I wanted to believe that I would never see him again. But deep down I knew the truth. Nathan wasn't the kind of man who let things go. This isn't over. A sharp breath caught in my throat. It has to be. Nathan exhaled, reaching up to brush his fingers against my cheek. You don't want that. I shuddered under his touch, my body betraying me. I don't know what I want. His fingers curled under my chin, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. Yes, you do. I swallowed hard. Nathan. But then his lips crashed against mine. And just like that, I was lost. The kiss was fire, burning through every wall I had tried to build. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me against him, and I felt it, the raw, desperate need that matched my own. I should have pushed him away. I should have screamed at him, told him that I hated him, that I would never forgive him. But I didn't. Because right now, in this moment, I needed this. I needed him. Nathan didn't ask for permission. He didn't hesitate. He lifted me effortlessly, carrying me inside and kicking the door shut behind us. My back hit the wall, and he was on me again, lips, hands, teeth. I gasped against his mouth, my fingers tangling in his hair. Nathan. He growled low in his throat, pressing harder against me. Say it. I knew what he wanted. I knew what he needed to hear. And God help me, I gave it to him. I need you. His grip on me tightened, his breath hot against my neck. You have me. His mouth moved lower, trailing heat down my skin, and I moaned, arching into him. My body had no shame. That I was giving myself to a man who had built his love on a lie. But it didn't matter. Because in this moment there was no past. And I wasn't strong enough to resist him. Not when I had never wanted anything more. The room was silent except for our heavy breathing. Nathan's body was still pressed against mine, his forehead resting against my shoulder. For the first time in weeks I felt alive. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Because as soon as the high faded, the truth came crashing back in. I pulled away, wrapping the sheets around me as I sat up. This doesn't change anything. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. It changes everything. I shook my head. No. Doesn't. He stared at me, something unreadable in his eyes. You still love me. I let out a hollow laugh. Love. You want to talk about love. His jaw tightened. You can lie to yourself all you want, Elise. But you can't lie to me. I looked away, my chest aching. I don't know how to stop wanting you. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then finally he whispered. Then don't. I swallowed hard. It's not that simple. It is that simple. He reached for me again, but this time I pulled away. And for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Real raw fear. Because he knew. He knew. This was the end. I stood up, wrapping the sheet tightly around me. You wanted me to suffer. To hurt the way you thought my mother hurt yours. Nathan flinched but didn't deny it. And I did. I said, my voice shaking. God, I did. I met his gaze, my throat tightening. But it wasn't enough, was it? You wanted me to break. To fall apart completely. His hands clenched into fists. Elise. But here's the thing, Nathan. I cut him off. You didn't destroy me. His breath caught. You thought you had all the power, I continued. But you don't. Nathan took a step forward, his voice hoarse. You love me. Tears burned in my eyes. And that's exactly why I have to leave. His entire body went still. I let out a shaky breath. Goodbye, Nathan. Then I turned, walking away before I lost the last shred of strength I had left. And this time he didn't stop me.